Hilchis Mechirah Perek Chamisha V'Esrim. Hamecher Dover Sheyesh Lo Tashmishim Le'Mocher Es HaTashmishim Elim Kem Pirish. So I'm saying a general rule. Person sells an item. So even though when a person uses this item, so there's something else that you use as well in order to help you use this item. But nevertheless, since you didn't specify, so the item that you sold, that's what you sold. And those things that are mishamish this item aren't part of the sale. And the first case is, the Rambam speaks about selling a house. That house has an area around the house, which is adjacent to the house, and that purpose of that area is for storage. That's the yotzia. It's the yotzia, like a patio around the house, which the purpose of that yotzia is in order to have a storage for the house. And it's possible that the only entrance to this yotzia is only through the house. So basically, it's something which is mishamish the house. A person, you have a house and you need things, a place to store things when you're living in the house. But lapel, since you're selling the house and you didn't say clearly that you're selling the yotzia, so therefore the yotzia is not in clothes. That's this din that we're learning here. He sells an item, which that item has other things, which people that are using this item or this thing need to use these tashmishim as well, or use these tashmishim as well. Nevertheless, lein mocheres tashmishim. We don't take for granted that the tashmishim are part of the sale. Elim came pirish unless you specify. Ketzah. Mocheres habayis, a person sells the house, is lein mocher es hayotzia shesvivas habayis. He doesn't sell this patio area which is around the house, which is the purpose of the area, is in order for the people that are living in the house to have a place to store things. Is even though from the house you go into the Yitzhak. So the Churid is a svara that the Yitzhak is like bottled the house. Nevertheless, we say no, that the house was sold, and this Yitzhak is something that's used in order to be mishamish the house, but on the other end, it's not part of the sale. If this Yitzhak had a width of 4 amas, so therefore it's considered an entity by itself. And those 4 amas is considered in itself a house. But if it's less than 4 amas wide, is hareo bechlal habayis, then it's considered part of the house. And since it's considered part of the house, so when you sell the house, so the yitzia is memela part of the sale without specifying. V'chein ho'aliyah shal gabi habayis absucha l'teichi ba'aruva mazivas habayis. In other words, you have an upper floor of the house. And the way to get to the upper floor is by going through the ceiling of the lower floor. So therefore then that upper floor is considered an extension of the lower floor of the house itself. And therefore again, you don't have to specify. You can assume, just like we said, Benegeh Maziva, if the Maziva is not 4 amas wide, it's pashut, that it's considered an extension of the house. Benegeh and Aliyah, even if it is 4 amas wide, a Bulapel is since the way you get to the Aliyah is only through the ceiling of the house. So therefore it's pashut that the Aliyah is considered an extension of the house. So we always say, Harehu bechlal habayis. Halacha beis. Hamoicher is habayis. Leimoder is a cheder shelifnim mimenu. You have 2 rooms. You have the outer room, which is being called the bayis, and then you have an inner room, which is the cheder shelifnim habayis. And the way you get to the cheder shelifnim habayis is through the bayis. But nevertheless, by selling the bayis, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cheder shelifnim habayis is considered also sold. So in other words, the aliyah, since the aliyah is like on top of the bayis, so and to get through it is through the ceiling of the bayis, so the aliyah is b'pashtos, considered part of the bayis. Masha'inkin a cheder shelifnim habayis is not considered b'pashtos part of the bayis. Nachamo. Hamecher is habayis, lei mocher is a cheder shelifnim imenu. Aval pishamotzel mitzarim achitzeinim. Even though when he described the bayis, he described the dimensions of the bayis, including that cheder. But nevertheless, Lapel, since he spoke about a bias, so he was extending the extent, he was saying the dimensions of the entire structure. But on the other end, he's not necessarily selling him that cheder. He could be only selling him the bias. So first of all, the erste Zach is Amecher Zabayis. He didn't sell the cheder shilifnim and habayis, even though that's the only way to get in to that cheder. And also Veleis Hagag, if there's a roof. So now, in a roof which you could get to the roof from the outside, Bisman sheyesh le maika asorat tvachim. If there's a maika around the roof of asorat tvachim, v'yesh bereichav arba, so then the roof has a kshivas b'fnei atzma. It's not considered bottled to the bias. So if you're selling the house, and you didn't specify that the roof is included, so Mamela it's not included. And also, V'leis haber hachofer bekarka, if there's a bear that's built into the ground, there's a reservoir built into the ground, or V'leis adus haboni baber, if you have a cistern that's built on top of the bear and extending into the house, but I'll call upon him, even though you said varum, even though you said clearly that you're selling the house to the depths and to the height, as we said before, but since you didn't say so therefore these things aren't included. In other words, the roof of the house and the bear or the dus which is under the house, all these things aren't included b'pashtus in the house unless you specify it. So Bekitzer, so the din is that a person sells someone a house and he didn't really say that he's selling him also the bear, so that bear belongs to the seller. He belongs to the seller. That bear still belongs to the seller. Now the question is, the house belongs to the buyer. The bear belongs to the seller. How does the seller get to the bear? So on that he said, Halacha Gimel, V'tzarech hamoicher liknis leiderech min alikeach k'dei lehikonis beber zeh iladus shishir. So even though he left it over for himself, but Lepeli sold the house to the buyer. And so he sold the entire house to the buyer. And even though he retained still this bear, but he didn't retain the bear with the derech. Mele, if he wants to have a derech, he's going to have to ask the derech from the buyer, and will buy the derech from the buyer. That's v'im amrlei macharti lecha abayis chutz min haber nadus. So knows bepashtus when he sells him a house, that doesn't include the bear in the dus. And but lepel, if he's going to want to have access to this bear in the dus, he's going to have to buy it from the buyer, from the lekeach. He's going to have to buy from him, get from him rights to have access to that bear in the dus. Masha'inkin, if he specified clearly that I'm selling you the house chutz min haber vadus, so be'emes, even if he wouldn't have specified the bear in the dus, anyways would have been his. So the fact that he specified, that causes that not only does he own the bear in the dus, but he also has a right to go to the bear in the dus without getting permission from the lekech. That's v'im amrlei. B'charti le'abayis chutz min haber yadus is ain't tzarech liknus leiderech. He doesn't have to buy derech. V'chein. Now this din that the moicher has to be liknus leiderech is when he retained the bear in the dus for himself. When he retained the bear in the dus for himself, so then we say that kol ha-mecher ba'in yofer mecher. So when he sold the house to the buyer, he sold the house completely, and he didn't even leave himself this derech, and to have this derech to his bear and dus, he needs permission from the buyer. But fakert v'chen ha-moicher b'eri dus bilvad, if a person, and that din is only bistam, mashenkin, if he said clearly chutz min haber v'adus, so then he doesn't need permission from the buyer. Now v'chein ha-moicher b'eri dus bilvad, if he only sells the bear and dus, so then, and the lekeh bought the bear and dus, so when you buy the bear and dus alone, so you're definitely buying the bear and dus together with the derech to get to the bear and dus. Ein lekeh tzarech liknus leiderech. Ela nichnas leteh beis shel mecher ad adus memala. That's part of the sale. So as when you sell the bear and dus, it's pashut that in the sale of the bear and dus is included the derech to get to the bear and dus. Masha'inkin, when you retain the bear and dus, so then it's not so pashut that you have the derech to get to the bear and dus. Only if you said clearly chutz min haber and dus, so then we assume that since you added words which weren't really necessary, it would have been chutz min haber and dus anyways. So then that's including that you also have the derech, which is similar to what we learned before, that there's a difference if you retain, if you sell a tree to someone. So the pashtus of selling the tree is that he has the rights to have this tree and also the yanik of the karka. Masha'inkin, if you retain the tree, so then the pashtus wouldn't be that you have the rights also with the karka. Only if we assume that the karka is also yours, that we said before, that chatzia karka is his. Halacha dal, shnei batim zelif nemizeh. You have two rooms, one into another. And machar shneim l'shnaim, at the same time you sold the two rooms, one to one and one to another. Einos shneim l'shnaim, or you gave it away. You gave the inside room to someone and the outside room to someone. Now the question is, does the person that lives in the inside room, how is he going to get to the inside room? L'churi, he has to have right of way through the outside room, but he gave the outside room to someone else. Does that person so that person needs permission, or he has to buy from the person that owns the outside room to get into the inside room? Now, just like we said before, that when a person, for example, leaves the inside room for himself, so he's going to have to, or leaves the bear for himself. The bear is left for himself. So Mamela, he's going to have to get access from the buyer to get to his bear. Knows the bear is taka his, but he's going to have to get access from the buyer of the house to get to his bear. So over here also, the inside room taka belongs to this other person, but he has to get access from the person that owns the outside room to get to the inside room. That's his din. Shnei batim zel lifnim izeh, mocher shneim l'shnaim, inos shneim l'shnaim. So the din, and he gave it to them at the same time, or he sold it to them at the same time. So the din is elam derech zal zeh. The person on the inside room doesn't have a right to go through the outside room to get there. If the outside room is the one that he gave away, and the inside room is the one that he sold, so b'chlal we have a rule that hanoisin is ba'ayin yofen neisen, hamoicher is also ba'ayin yofen meicher. But the noisin is a more of an ayin yofen than a meicher. So v'meila, when he's giving away the outside room and he's selling the inside room, so it's pashut, even more pashut, that in order to get access to the inside room which you bought, you're going to have to get permission from the person that owns the outside room which he got as a matana. That's talking about if the outside room was b'matana, the inside room was b'mecher, or both of them were b'mecher, or both of them were b'matana. Aval in mocher achitzim, if l'peil the outside room was sold, v'nosan apnimi, and he gave the inside room away, so here is yeshli derech, because kol ha-nesen, ba'ayin yofen nesen, yeser min ha-mecher. So in other words, b'chlal, when you give something as a present, you're giving away more than when you sell something. So Mela, since he gave the inside room to one and he sold the outside room to the other, so mitzad the kol ha-nesen, ba'ayin yofen nesen, we assume that when he gave the inside person the room, he also gave it to him with the right of access to the outside person. And Mela, he's only giving he's giving the outside room to someone, but he's giving it to him also b'hagbola. B'hagbola is that the person that he's giving it to he's selling the outside room to one person, and he's giving the inside room to another person. So we say that since he's selling, this is giving, so we assume that even though he sold the outside room to one person, but that was only b'hagbola. The hagbola was that the person that received as a present the inside room has right of way to get to the inside room, and he doesn't need permission from the person at the outside room. So again, if they were both in Mechirah, both bin Sinah, so then they do need permission. If the outside room was bin Sinah, the inside room was Mechirah, how did they need permission? He needs permission to get into the inside. But if the inside room was bin Sinah and the outside room was Mechirah, so then the person that got the inside room doesn't need permission from the person that bought the outside room. Halacha hey, hamoicher is habayis, someone that sells a house, is mocher es hatanur, ves hakirayim, ves malbin es apsochim. In other words, the question is what's considered part of the house and what's just considered something that's in the house, but it's not really part of the house. So we say the tanur and the kirayim, the stove which is attached to the ground, and also the malbin es apsochim is the frames of the doors, of the door frames, hamuchubarim betit, which are connected to the walls with mortar, Vesadelis, and also the door, Vesanagar, and the beam that goes across, the cross beam that goes across the door, Vesamanul, and the lock, they are all part of the house, and therefore that's part of the sale. So if the owner says, yeah, I sold you the house, but I'm taking my doors, I'm taking the beam, I'm taking the lock, that's part of the house. Avalei maftech, but the key to open the door, that's not something which is part of the house. And also a machar is a machteshes akvua. There's the millstone which is attached. So the millstone has the upper stone and the lower stone. The lower stone is attached to the ground, and the upper stone is on top of that stone. So as umachar is a machteshes akvua, he sold also that affixed millstone which is attached to the ground. Avalei is hamitaltel. Not if you have a millstone which is movable. Whereas if you have a mill which is a movable mill, so that wouldn't be considered part of the sale. Masha'engen, if you have a machteshes which is kvur, the millstone which is connected to the ground, that is considered part of the sale. Umochar is a itztribul. Itztribul is like a stand which you put the mill on top of, which is attached to the ground. Avalei is hakeli shakemach yerid l'teichei. Shu can make fifa shalet. So in other words, when you're grinding the tvur, so then you have a place where the flour is coming into, and over there you have like a keli, which the kema goes into it, and that's like a basket of wood, and that's not part of the house. That's just a keli that you're using in order to contain the flour. And also v'li mocher es malben is kari amita. Now they would have the bed, and the bed would be on the ground, and they would put like a certain frame under the bed, like a certain pieces of wood under the bed, in order that the bed shouldn't go into the ground. In other words, it shouldn't make a hole into the ground. It should be held on these malbanes, like a certain piece of wood, a hard piece of wood, that would hold up the legs of the bed. So even if those malbanes karyamita are attached to the ground, but lepel, since the purpose of them is for the bed, and the bed is not considered part of the house, so therefore the malbanes karyamita are also not part of the house. And also veleis malbanes achalenis, the frames of the windows are also not part of the house. Avul pi she'ein mechubarim b'tid, they're also connected b'tid. Mipnei she'ein l'noy, they're there for decoration, the decorative purposes. So the malbanes of the deles, which is there in order for the function, you need a house, has to have a door, so that's considered part of the house. But the masha'inkin, the malbanes of the chalein, since they're there for decorative purposes, so therefore they're not part of the house. Avul pi she'ein mechubarim b'tid. But if a person says, I'm selling you the house with everything that's in the house, so then that includes everything that's in the house. All the things that he just said is not included in the house. It's nachamol. When a person sells a house, so those things that are attached to the ground, that are attached to the house, he says the taner, kirayim, the malbanis apsachim, amuchubarim betit, the delas, the nagar, the manol, the machteshes hakfua, the istrabul, all these things that are attached to the ground, they are considered part of the house. Masha'inkin, the keli, which the kemach falls into, and also the malbanis of the karyamita, and also the malbanis of the chalenis, they're not considered part of the house. Masha'inkin, if he said, hu v'chol mashabeteche, if he says, I'm selling you abayas, so they're not included. Those things, the first things we mentioned were included, these things aren't included. Masha'inkin, if he says, hu v'chol mashabeteche, everything is included. Harikula mechur. HaMoicher is a chotzer, someone that sells the chotzer. So then, in the chotzer is machar beides sichon u'ma'orish betecha. There's any cisterns, any reservoirs, things that are part of the chotzer is all part of the chotzer. And also b'chol habatim, and all the houses of the chotzer, achitzeinim, v'apnimim, side the houses which are on the inside of the chotzer, and side the houses which extend towards the outside of the chotzer. All these houses are considered part of the chotzer. Ubatim sheyesh b'machil, there's certain houses which they store the sand in there. Or v'hachanuyas apsuchim l'teich, chanuyas were like little booths that they would sell things from it. So those chanuyas which are pasuach into the chotzer, they're standing in the chotzer, and the pasuach in the chotzer, that's part of the chotzer. Avol she'ein apsucha l'teicha. But if you have a chanus which is standing really on the ground of the chotzer, but the opening of this chanus is not in the chotzer, but it's outside the chotzer, is einon mkarim, that's not part of the sale of the chotzer. So even though they're actually standing in the chotzer, but since it opens towards the outside of the chotzer, it's not considered part of the chotzer. Now, hoye psuchis lekano lekan. If this chanus had two openings, it had one opening towards the side of the chotzer, and the other opening was towards the outside. So it depends. Imrev tashmishan lutecha. If most of its usage is in the chotzer, nor most of the chanus is, most of the usage of the chanus is for inside the chotzer, so nimkarasima, so that we consider this chanus as part of the chotzer. However, v'mulav, if most of the usage is not in the chotzer, but outside, so then einanim karasima. So that's this din. So the din is a person that sells a chotzer. He sells the beiras, the sichon ma'aris, which are in the chotzer. He sells the batim, which are chitzeinim apnimi in the chotzer. He sells the batim sheyesh b'mchel. He sells the chanuyas. That only if those chanuyas are functioning in the chotzer, or the pesach of the chanuyas is towards the chotzer, or the ikar pesach is towards the chotzer. He doesn't sell the metalkim which are lying in the chotzer, because those metalkim are not part of the chotzer. However, bisman she'omar hi v'chol mash b'techa harei kulam mechurin, so then everything is mocher. That's kulam mechurin. So in other words, if he didn't say any specific inclusion, he just was selling the chotzer, so everything was included except the metalkim sheb'techa is not included, and the chanuyas which are not psuchos b'techa are also not included. However, if he said hi v'chol mash b'techa is harei kulam mechurin, all the things that he mentioned which weren't mechurin are mechurin. Either way, even if he said he v'chol mash b'techa is le'mocher is hamerchetz, because hamerchetz is a inya la'atzmei, it's not really part of the chotzer. It's something which is a inya la'atzmei. It's like kivech chshivus la'atzma, and also b'lei beis habat sheb'techa. If you have an olive press in the chotzer, so that olive press is also not considered part of the chotzer, because it's choshev, and therefore it's kiveh bracha la'atzma. The batim, which you said before in Halacha Vav, that the batim hachitzenim v'apnimin, Pashtus means that there's the bayis hachitzin, like we learned before. There was a person selling a house, so there's the outside room and the inside room. So when you sell a house, it's only including the outside room. The inside room is not considered part of the house. Mashenka, when you're selling a chutzner, so Mamela, side the outside room, which actually opens into the chutzner, and side the inside room, which goes from the outside room to the inside room, from the bayis into that bayis. But since sof kol sof, both of them, side the bayis, side the cheder apnimi, is part of the chutzner. So therefore, it's part of when the person sells the chutzner, he includes side the bayis hachitz and the side the bayis apnimi. Halacha zayin. Hamoicher is beis habad. The person goes ahead and sells an olive press. So we said before that an olive press, a beis habad is not considered part of the chutzner. But if a person sells a beis habad, so is mocher so even hagdei. So obviously there's a building that's the beis habad, and then there's mocher so even hagdei habnuya ba'aretz sheteknu aleh azeisim. So there's this big stone which is built onto the ground, and that's where you go ahead and break up and crush the zeisim. And also ves haklunsoy shel erez shesoimchem behem beis tchinas hazeisim. There was made out of cedar wood that was like beams amudim that would hold up. In other words, when they would press down on the olives, these beams would help in order to contain that press, somehow. So those klunsoy shel erez, which you support, be'ez tchinas hazeisim, while you're pressing the olives, so that's also part of the press. And also ves hayikovim. Hayikovim is like the reservoirs where the wine, after you press it, so there's like a hole, the bear which the oil goes into, and also v'sakelim shenoisen bem v'sakelim azesim akshushim. There also part of the press is also those kalim that they would put the crushed olives into. Behema meforches, that would be called the meforches. So these are all part of the beis habad. It's nothing more. When a person sells a beis habad, so it includes also that even agdela, that stone which you crush the olives on top of. It includes those beams which support while you're pressing the olives, and also the reservoir which the oil goes into, and the kalim which you push the crushed olives into. Avolei mocher serichaim el yenam, the stone which is on top of that large stone. In other words, on top of that large stone which you crush the olives on, there's another stone. That's a movable stone. That's a movable stone. So that's not part of the sale. However, bisman she'amar hu v'chol mashu b'teicha. However, if he said, "I'm selling you everything," harikul mechur. Aber benkach u benkach. Either way, even if he said, "Hu v'chol mashu b'teicha," leimochar es hakoivshim shemechapsh b'mazeisim. In other words, besides that stone which they would press on top, there would be also like planks of wood that they would put on top of the olives, and that there would be like another beam that would also go down onto the olives. So those planks of wood which would press down onto the olives, that's not included in the sale, even if he said, "Hu v'chol mashu b'teicha." V'leis hagalgal, galgal means a wheel. It was something that was used in order to turn that stone, and v'leis haker, and also not the beam that went down on top of the olives. In other words, there was the beam that went on top of the olives, and vice versa, there was some type of a galgal which caused that the stone should turn, and there was like things that were like other pieces of wood which were pressing on top of the olives. V'lei hasakin, and not the sacks that are made out of goat's hair. V'lei martzufim is also sacks but made out of leather. But al kol panim, all these things are not part of the beis habad. So the original was part of the beis habad is the even agdoila and those beams that are there to support when you press the olives, and also the reservoir where the oil goes into, and even those kalim that you put the pressed olives into. But however, the rechaim el yenim, that's not part of the beis habad bepashtus, unless you say hu v'chol asher b'teichei. And even if you say hu v'chol asher b'teichei, it doesn't include those pieces of wood that you press with, and also that beam that you press with, and also that galgal, that wheel that's used to turn around the stone on top. All this is not included, even if you say hu v'chol mash b'teichei. However, amalei beis habad v'chol tashmishav ani meichel lecha. If he said hu v'chol mashabatechei, so these things that we just mentioned at the end of halacha zayin aren't included. However, if he said hu beisabad v'chol tashmishu animeichalecha, is kulan mechurin, all these things are part of the sale. However, hoye chutzala chanuyes sheshoitchem b'mazeisim eyashumshman, outside the beisabad there were like little booths where they would spread out the zeisim in order to dry or whatever. Is in Motzele Mitzar Machitzeinim Shalem, when he went ahead and he spoke about that he's selling the Beis Abad, and he included in the boundaries these areas. So Kan Hakel is Kain also these Chanuyas. However, Vimlav, but if he didn't spell out clearly in those boundaries, these areas is Lekon El Mashabatecha. So there's three madregas. The madrega Ameiches Beis Abad, that's what we said before, what's the pashtus considered part of the Beis Abad. Masha'en Kain L'moshel, the upper stone, that's not considered part of the Beis Abad. Lei machas rekayim b'liyin. Masha'en kain, if he said hu v'chol mashabateche, so then he is kain l'merikayim b'liyin. But on the other end, there are other things that is not kain, even if he said hu mashabateche, which is the beam that you use to press, and those pieces of wood that you use to press, and that wheel that's used to turn around the stone. Now, if he said that's what he, so that's not considered, even if he said hu v'chol mashabateche. However, if he said Beis Abad v'chol tashmishov, so then these are included. However, the chanuyes, which you go ahead and you spread out the zeisim mishumshman, so they are only included if they were included in the boundaries that just gave to the Beis Abad. Halacha tes. Hamoicher is hamerchet, someone that sells a bathhouse. Is mochar is Beis hanesorim. He sold also that place where it holds those nesarim, those planks of wood, that there were the planks of wood that they would sit on in an area when they weren't dressed. So that based on nesarim, so that place where they held, we're not talking about the planks of wood. We're talking about the place where they held those planks of wood, which they would sit on. Sheimarumim, that area is part of the merchets, and also the Beis Hayikomim. Beis Hayikomim is the place where you hold the kelim, shenoitlim b'mamayim, which the water is taken when people want to have water in this Beis HaMerchetz. So there's kelim over there. There's a place where the kelim are held, and also there's Beis HaSafsalim, the place where the benches are held. Sheyesh naleim b'chatzar HaMerchetz kshen levushim, the place where the benches are held, where those benches are, the function of those benches were that when people were already dressed, that's where they would sit on. And also there's Beis Avilois, the place where they held the towels, shemistapkim bem, which they would use to dry themselves. But so basically, when a person sells a merchas, he sells the Beis HaNesarim, the Beis HaYikomim, and the Beis Havilois. Avalei Machris HaNesarim Atzma, he didn't sell the Nesarim, and all this Beis HaYikomim Atzma, he didn't actually sell those kelim, and Avalei HaSasalim Atzma, and not those benches, and Avalei Havilois Atzma, and also not those towels. However, Bisman Sha'amar Hu V'chol Mashabatecha, a person sells a merchas. He says, I'm selling you the merchas with everything that's in it, is Harikulim, Mechurin, all these things that we just mentioned that aren't included, are included. Benkach or Benkach, Mochar Habreches, Hamesapkis Lemayim, those pools of water which supply water to the Beis HaMerchetz, that's certainly not included, even if he said, Hu V'chol Mashabatecha. Hamesapkis Lemayim, Beim Mesacham Beis Mesaksham. Also Beiskinas Yaitzim, and not the place where they gather the wood, probably to use for firewood. So that area is not considered part of the Beis HaMerchetz, even if he said Hu v'chol mashabatecha. However, v'mamalei merchetz v'chol tashmisha ani meichalach, so then harin kulim mechurin afal pishin chutzala. So that's the same principle that we learned before. In other words, there is the Beis Abad itself, and then the Beis Abad and v'chol mashabatecha. And then there's something which is not really even considered b'chol mashabateche, but there's something that's called chol tashmishov. There's something that's being mishamish the Beis Abad. It's not the Beis Abad, it's not beteche, but it's mishamish the Beis Abad. Al derech there's the Beis HaMerchetz, there's the Beis HaMerchetz itself, and then there's the Beis HaMerchetz v'chol mashabateche, and then there's nochmar merchetz v'chol tashmishov. So there's certain things that are included in merchetz itself. That's the Beis HaNesarim, the Beis HaYikomim, the Beis HaSafsalim. There's Merchez V'chol Mashabatechi. These are the Nesarim itself and the Yikomim itself and the Vilois itself. Masha'en Kein, the Breches HaMesapkes Lemayim, or the base kinus eitzim, that wouldn't even be considered the merchez v'chol mashabetech. It's not part of the merchez. It's not in the merchez. It's outside the merchez, and it's something that's mishamish the merchez. Masha'enkin, if he said hu v'chol tashmish, merchez v'chol tashmish, so then it's included as well.